Hello and welcome to another video and podcast from fantasyfootballscout.co.uk. My name is David and today I am joined by Tom Freeman, who is the Deputy Editor of Fantasy Football Scout, and we are looking at yet another FPL team reveal. The game is live, we can tinker with our teams, and the fantasy world's brightest and best can now bring you the 15 players they have chosen as part of their first draft. Thanks for joining us, Tom. How have you been getting on since the game launched?
Yeah, it's been good. I had a tinker last week, which is when I came up with this draft that you're about to see. I've taken a bit of a step back since then. Just been working on some other content for the website, but yeah, it's maybe not so much about all the players at the moment, but it's more about the structure and the price points and captaincy and things like that. So yeah, it should be interesting to have a look at it.
Well, you've mentioned there that you've been working on some content, and for those of the audience who don't know what it is, someone in the Fantasy Football Scout editorial room gets up to on a day-to-day basis. What does that look like? Because in many ways, I suppose, how much you sort of, in effect, dunk your head in a members area bucket every day for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. That's probably where a lot of your insight comes from, and I imagine there's a lot of people out there that might find that very interesting.
Yeah, you know what it's like, David. Obviously, previously being editor of the site, that tab is permanently open, and you do tend to do. I've had people put heat maps up online before, and without even them telling me the player, you can kind of work out who it is. That's how deep you are in it all. But it's great. It's what I've always loved doing. You know, prior to working at Scout, I've always been into statistics and analytics and things like that. So working this job now is kind of perfect for me, and it's great over at the site at the moment. You know, pre-season is probably one of my favourite times of the year. Because it's not quite, once you're in a season, again, you know what it's like, it's very, very full on. Especially the past couple of seasons when there's been so many midweek rounds and double game weeks. But in pre-season, you get to take a little bit of a step back and really look at the friendlies and track all the players and the minutes and tactical shifts and that kind of thing. So I really, really like it, and all the planning aspects of it as well for the new season.
Yeah, I have to say I'm a big fan of the preseason content, especially, and also having had the opportunity to, as you mentioned, be involved in producing that in the past as well. It's so much fun because without wanting to, bang the Fantasy Football Scout membership drum, I mean, that is a big part of why it is useful, because you can go into great detail of who's playing in preseason, where they're playing, how many minutes. People are probably fed up of me talking about John Lundstrom and that spreadsheet on these videos, but that's just what you get in a preseason.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I don't know if we'll ever get that level again of misclassification with a player, but there's still loads of little nuggets you can take from it. The pre-season friendlies properly really started at the weekend. Arsenal were in action. Burnley and Wolves, I think, did behind closed doors ones, but we're already tracking those. And the level of detail we'll go into with it is better than anywhere else. That's 100% say that. So yeah, we'll have regular kind of reports throughout pre-season. I think you're going to do some videos as well, aren't you, David? So yeah, it's really exciting time.
Yeah, I have to say I'm super looking forward to doing the video on that preseason minute spreadsheet, because unfortunately I'm not a grass FC man. I'm analytics, I'm spreadsheet FC, whatever you want to call it. That's me. I do like the numbers. It's like the Matrix in front of my eyes. So that's me. But yeah, let's shift a little bit more back towards yourself and your team. And before we get actually into your team, one other aspect, which you are a very humble man, Tom, and whenever I mention this, you're like, "Oh, David, you're far too kind." But you have an incredible OR history in FPL. And previously, I think a Hall of Fame top 100, something like that. Yeah,
I was up to number two for
number
a
two.
period.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, I did reach two, and then it kind of dropped off a bit after that. I mean, it's the guys at the top know how difficult it is, because you have one kind of so-so season and suddenly you tumble down. But yeah, I can always say that I got to number two.
Yeah, I mean, that's much harder than I'm ever going to get to, so you should definitely be proud of that. But the thing is, we were talking about before we came on as well, that consistency in FPL is also really important in terms of like regularly finishing in a decent rank bracket. And so you've got 5 finishes in the top 1K, and you've got another 3 that were also in the top 10K. So I guess that's 8 top 10K finishes, 5 in the top 1K. These are the sorts of things that Tom is never going to say himself, because he's far too humble for this. But it's a very enviable record, and obviously, anyone who's watching and listening to this, listen to this man, he knows what he's talking about. But yeah, I mean, in terms of that OR history, I mean, like, are there any sort of overarching principles that you felt helped achieve such an enviable record?
I've done a Meet the Manager video, which was my first ever video appearance for Scout a few years back, and I think that's still available. And a lot of the kind of the approach and the ideas have remained the same. I really hit the ground running playing FPL. I think I had top 1K finishes in 3 of my first 4 seasons playing, because I played a bit with the Telegraph game beforehand, so I could kind of take elements of that, and it felt like I knew what I was doing straight away in FPL. And obviously, it's got a lot more difficult nowadays. I think it was about 50K last year, and it's getting harder, but the enjoyment's still there. And I'd love to kind of get a sixth top 1K. So let's have a look at this draft maybe, and see if it is. Let us know in the comments what you think. But yeah, no, it'd be great to get a sixth one. I just love FPL, and the enthusiasm's it's never gone. I always think, you're probably the same after playing for 5 or 10 years or whatever. Will I start to get a bit less enthusiastic about it? But I just never do. I'm probably more excited than ever about this season. So yeah, no, it's all good, and let's hope we can have another good season.
Yeah. Well, fingers crossed for you, because I mean, it's always good when we can say that the editorial content is brought to you by the brightest
Yeah,
and
no
best.
pressure.
No pressure.
No pressure, right?
Well, I mean, at this point, I will try and take the pressure off. I'll spare you your blushes. I'll shut up about your history, and let's do a Pep Guardiola. Everything is finished, and we're back to square one. It's the start of a whole new season, right?
Yeah.
Here's your team, at least your initial thoughts after the game launched. And for the benefit of the podcast listeners, I'll just run through it as a squad list. So we've got in goal, we've got Pickford and Virginia, so 2 Everton goalkeepers there. Then you've got Trent Alexander-Arnold, Reece James, and Nathan Ake as your starting back 3, with Botman and Baldock on the bench. Then we've got in midfield a 5-man unit of Saka, Burmo, Rashford, Matoma, and Martinelli. Like most people, the captain's armband is, of course, on Erling Haaland, and your second centre-forward is Nkunku, and on the bench is Cameron Archer at your club, actually, Aston Villa, so a homegrown talent for yourself there. So that's your 15, and we're going to start by talking about what I perceive to be probably the headline here, is 2 Arsenal midfielders, because a lot of people are kind of just really picking one and then going with Jesus. And so you've decided to opt away from the Brazilian striker, and you've gone with a Brazilian midfielder instead in Martinelli, and the English sensation that is Bukayo Saka. So what was your thinking there with covering off Arsenal with those good fixtures at the start of the campaign?
Yeah, well, it was that Forest fixture, the first one, which really caught my eye. Forest were really poor travellers last year. They really struggled on the road. So it was that fixture which immediately jumped out. And then, some pretty decent ones to follow. They got Palace and they got Fulham after that. So I always thought a double up in attack. I think quite a few people are looking at triple ups in attack, but I'm on a double for now. How did I land on those players? Well, Saka, when the price list came out, I thought he was underpriced, probably by 0.5, maybe even a million. I thought he'd be 9 or 9.5. So when he came in a bit cheaper than that, he just, I'll be very, very surprised if he's not in my draft come game week 1. He will offer great value, staying on penalties, which we expect him to. The second midfield spot, it was kind of Odegaard or Martinelli. The only thing which pushed me towards Martinelli was the signing of Havertz, and how is his kind of positioning going to impact Odegaard? Are we going to see a bit of a shift in the tactics? We think he might play the kind of the Xhaka role, Havertz on the left. But if he's a bit more advanced than maybe what Xhaka was, does then Odegaard push back a little bit deeper? And Martinelli has got that superior goal threat over Odegaard. I don't think anybody would deny that. I know Odegaard scored 15 last season, but I think Martinelli is playing closer to goal and will score more goals over the course of the season. So I really like that with him. He's a bit cheaper as well. He's only 8 million. I looked at Jesus, but I really like Nkunku, which we'll talk about in a bit. So the space was in midfield. I haven't got anything against Jesus as a pick. I like him. Finished the season pretty well against Wolves. So, he can be a good pick as well. It was just in my structure, the double midfield worked rather than going for Jesus as one of the 2 attackers.
Yeah, it certainly makes a lot of sense. And the handy thing you've got here is that there will be a lot of people who will be deliberating over which Arsenal midfielder they do have. And for you to be able to say, oh, well, I've got 2 of them, potentially helps you in some scenarios whereby, well, you're going to have more of those players that lots of people will own. I was speaking to Ali, the reigning champion, earlier on, who was saying that the way the pricing's worked out this year, yes, there's lots of very cheaply priced players, and some people are sort of complaining that they're too cheap. But because there's lots of them, it does mean that you're going to have a bit of a dichotomy between, there'll be like maybe 20% on Martinelli, 20% on Saka, 20% on
Yeah.
Jesus, 20% on Odegaard, which that's what creates that differentialness between those teams. And if you've got
Yeah.
two of those midfielders that people are frantically trying to just find one for, could potentially help you.
Yeah, and you can apply that to other players, can't you? Rashford and Fernandes now. I mean, I'm seeing the majority of teams I'm seeing has got Rashford, but there are quite a few who've gone Fernandes, for the minutes and for the penalties. And even at Brighton, you've got a lot of midfielders all similarly priced, whether it's Matoma, whether it's Marsh, whether it's Gross or Enciso. So yeah, everybody's a bit cheaper, but I don't think you're going to see. So, I mean, unless somebody has a really good pre-season, you might see a bit of variation in teams, despite everybody having a Brighton midfielder or a Man United midfielder. It might be a little bit of difference between who people go for.
Yeah, and I suppose one other person who might also be someone who there may be fluctuation of, and there will be very much a yes or no camp on them, is the man missing from your team. But don't worry, he's missing from mine, and he's missing from Ali's team, and he's missing from Joe's team. He's missing from a lot of people's teams, Mohamed Salah.
Yep.
Now, I
Yeah.
keep sort of saying to people, I'm fed up of asking this question. I'm really not, because I enjoy kind of putting him out there and watching people doing team reveals videos with me kind of squirm a little bit, because I don't think any of us think he's a bad option, right? He just doesn't fit the structure.
No. Yeah, well, since I built this, I did have a play around with a draft, and I can fit him into a draft. It was more of a 4-4-2, and I didn't have Alexander Arnold in it, but it was a good team, and that's, I think, one of the big decisions which we've got over the next month, isn't it? Do you go Salah? I mean, the Chelsea fixture first, not quite so appealing as maybe playing them last year would have been with Pochettino coming in, but then it's that Bournemouth one in game week 2. So I'm certainly not ruling out starting with Salah, but I want to see maybe how they set up in pre-season with the new midfield signings and that right-hand side with Alexander Arnold and the new midfielder whose name I'm still not going to attempt to pronounce. But how the setup kind of changes with that. Yeah, I mean, that is probably in all of these drafts we look at, and these one premium, well, maybe it's a 2 premium draft with Trent, but you know what I mean, one premium attacker. That's the obvious, what we're looking for in a lot of them, or potential floor, and it's no salary. So it's just working out whether you need to get him in there, or if you can cover it off by having 2 kind of good £8 million-ish midfielders instead of maybe Salah and a cheaper one. So that's still to be decided, but if you're not going to captain him, which I don't think I will in the first few weeks, then it raises the question of, is he going to offer enough value? And that potentially not. So
yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and it's usually encouraging when someone who has the OI history that you have, Tom, is kind of thinking the same way as me. Like
I do get a lot wrong, but yeah.
So I've
done
it.
I'm thinking at the moment.
I said I'd spare you the pressure and the blushes, and I went straight back to it. But no, you're very much on the same page as me in that if you're not going to captain him for those first 6, it means that you need a seriously high amount of value from him to justify weakening your team in other areas. I think it's quite interesting that you found a 4-4-2, because I think that you really do have to go with a different formation if you're going to get Salah. And so I tell you what, I might give that a try, because I did promise myself, just to look after myself, that I would make sure I tried a Salah draft. And I was thinking, how am I going to do that in 3-5-2? I'll try it in 4-4-2 now.
Yeah, it looks okay. I can remember a couple of seasons I started back with a 4-4-2, and I think it was similar to in the way that I wanted to get Son in the team, and I think it was as a 3rd premium then rather than a 2nd. And I think I had Rafinha as well. I can just remember a couple of years back, and I think it worked out okay. So I'm not going to kind of rule it out completely. But then you compare the differences between the 2 drafts, and you pick out the 4 or 5 players difference. And I think it did feel a bit stronger when I lined up all of the players. You're relying on Salah to deliver big time if you do it, I think. And so it's a lot of pressure on him. I think people who are including him will probably captain him. But I think if you've got Salah, you have to captain him game week 2, don't you, against Bournemouth? But my kind of thinking was, I don't fancy Haaland at home to Newcastle. Then I have got Alexander Arnold in this draft, who could potentially be a captain, and will speak about him in a bit, but the way he finished the season, I think he's a viable captain some weeks, which I don't often say with defenders, but he's kind of changing the game a bit with this kind of hybrid role, isn't he?
He is. I mean,
So,
in many ways, he's not really a defender anymore when they're in possession. He pretty
no,
much is a central midfielder. And I mean,
yeah.
I keep wondering that if he plays this position all season, then next season he's going to be like a 7.5 million midfielder. But I don't want to spook everybody just yet. We'll save that for 12 months' time, I
No.
reckon. But yeah, let's have a look at your team in sort of, let's break down the different positions and go into some more detail. And we'll start with the most
Okay.
glamorous of those, the goalkeepers. So we've got we've got Pickford and we've got Virginia. And so, I mean, clearly, you know, there's a focus on Everton there. And yeah, 4.5 and I think a 4 million there. So you've got, you know, 8.5 on your goalies. Is that the sort of pricing structure you'd like to have? You know, are you going to stick
Yeah.
with backing up the starting Everton goalkeeper with his replacement? Are there other clubs you're interested in? What's he thinking with the goalies?
Yeah, I do tend to start with a 4.5 and a 4.0 just when the budget's a bit tighter at the beginning of the season. And then if I wild card, you know, I tend to wild card between 7 and 9 most years, I think game week that is. And then I might look to kind of change things around a bit and maybe go up to a 5 million goalie. But to start the season, I like the 4.5 and the 4. I think Pickford, after Dyche came in, I think they kept five clean sheets, Everton, which was, and Pickford, and that was the same amount as David Raya and I think Ramsdale as well, although Arsenal did have a bad kind of second half of the season. But I think Everton with a pre-season under Dyche could be quite important because I think he'll get them drilled in that kind of setup that he likes. I don't think they'll leave as much space potentially next year. So, and he makes a lot of saves. I think he was fourth for saves after Dyche came in, Pickford. So you've got that a few clean sheets maybe, or a couple of clean sheets in the first 5-6 weeks. I'm just going to pull up the fixtures now. So they've got Fulham, who they did struggle against last year, but they've got Wolves at home, and then they go to Sheffield United in the first 4. So there's some okay fixtures. I suppose other goalies I did look at. I looked at Johnston from Palace, who I like now that we know that Hodgson's going to be there. Flecken as well, but there's a bit of uncertainty there, isn't it, at the moment? We don't know what's happening with David Raya. We don't know if Flecken's going to be number 1. And the same can be said for the Brighton keepers as well. We don't know if it's going to be Steele or Verbruggen. So yeah, it could change, but Pickford's the one I'm kind of looking at the moment as the best 4.5.
And well, certainly of the people you've mentioned there, he's the one who's most likely to start games, obviously. And so, you know, by
Yeah,
just locking
at
in
the
the
moment,
pricing,
yeah.
well, at the moment, yeah, because I
Yeah,
can't.
yeah.
I mean, there was maybe 3 or 4 years ago when there was a sort of like goalkeeper merry-go-round, and we haven't had one in a while. But the transfer market for goalkeepers right now is crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, because we was writing about the new Spurs keeper at the weekend, Vicario, who's come in. And again, we're thinking he's going to be number 1 because there's a bit of uncertainty with Lloris at the moment, but he is actually still at the club. He's still got a year left on his contract, and the Brighton keepers as well. If you can get a Brighton 4.5, it's going to be great value. But are we going to know at the beginning of the season if they're 100% nailed on? I'm not so sure we will be. So it's very hard to say we're going to go in with a Brighton keeper. You could get them both, but then it's 9 million for the pair rather than 8.5, and I don't like that. So we kind of need De Zerbi to come out and say in pre-season who's his number 1, but I just don't know if we'll get that.
No, I
I don't
don't
see
know.
why you would get that. You're going to want to keep them competing, and they're in Europe, aren't they? They'll probably get game time, both of them. It just depends who's getting the Premier League games and if there's consistency with those starts for us to pick them. But yeah, that's who I'm looking at the moment, Pickford anyway. Like you say, he's the nailed on option there. In terms of the 4.0, I did have a look at West Ham keeper Areola, who played in Europe last year. There was some talk of him maybe displacing Fabianski, but again, it's an unknown. We don't know at the moment.
Yeah.
So,
You actually read my mind because I was about to ask you about West Ham because they're another club where you
okay.
could get the 4 million pricing structure there available. I suppose just going back to Brentford, it's all ifs, buts, and maybes. But if Raya does leave, and then you've got Flecken and Strakosha at 4.5 and 4.0, I mean, I'm actually, I would probably lock that in and then not think about it.
Yeah,
That's me. So I wondered if you felt the same way.
Yeah, I think I do because Brentford were really strong at home, and I think they start with 4 home games in the first 6. Yeah, they've got Tottenham, Palace, Bournemouth, and Everton, and in the first 6, and then they go to Forest, and then they've got Burnley at home after that. So that's a really good. I would probably feel a bit more confident because Brentford are a known quantity. Whereas Everton, we're hoping for improvement on that side of things under Dyche. But yeah, I mean, getting Flecken and Strakosha for 8.5, Brentford #1 guaranteed each week. That's great, isn't it? So that's another one to keep an eye on. I mean, there's plenty of reason we were talking about pre-season earlier, but this is all good to, we're going to hopefully learn this over the next month, and that's why it's so important going into game week 1 that you're up to date with all the info.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of other things that are available on Fantasy Football Scout, I've had the season ticker up on the screen whilst we talk through the early fixtures for those goalkeepers, and that is super important for making sure you're planning for game week 1, so you know who you can benefit from the good fixtures in the first 3 or 4 game weeks, but then also planning in loosely when those transfers are going to be, and with the interactivity that it provides as well, so you can sort by best attacking fixtures, defensive fixtures. You can plan some rotations as well. I mean, I've got to say, this is probably one of my favourite and most utilised sections of the members area. I don't know about you, Tom.
Yeah, season ticker, absolutely. I was going to say I use a lot of the custom tables as well, which I don't know if everybody is aware of, but you can kind of go in and you can build your own custom tables and pull out the stats that you like. If you're into your expected data, you can go and get your XG and your non-penalty XG and all that. If you're into more your kind of straightforward shots, created chances, I've kind of gone in and built like goal threat tables, creator tables, where you look at all the kind of creative metrics. And if you're a bit geeky like me, it's the kind of thing you look forward to on a Monday morning when you open it up after a weekend's football, and you can kind of dive in and look at those stats and take what you want from it, really. So yeah, I mean, it's like I said earlier, I'm in there all the time, and you can get so much out of it. It really is. It's really good.
Well, it's just another opportunity to remind people that if they haven't already signed up for Fantasy Football Scout membership, that now is the time to do it. Of course, you can save up to 30% with the preseason prices. You're going to have world-leading preseason guide for all FPL teams, which we've already talked about. The preseason minutes tracker, points projections, transfer planners, and drafts from some of the best managers as well. So do not forget to sign up for that. Now is the time. Let's get back to your team, Tom. Let's talk about the defenders now. We've got Trent Alexander-Arnold, Reece James, Nathan Ake, Botman, and Baldock. So 3 of the more, I'm going to say of the more premium defenders, because obviously Trent is very premium. James is premium. Ake is maybe just straddling the fence somewhat, being 5 million, and then a 4.5 and a 4 million. So a nice array of different price points there. Let's start with Trent. I'm guessing you think he's almost essential.
Well, I don't know if he's essential this year, because there's so much value in that kind of 5 to 5.5 million bracket. I mean, I've put this draft up here, and there's no Arsenal defender, there's no Luke Shaw. So you can, I don't think he's essential, but I just remember how good Trent was after that positional switch when he went inverted. I think from game week 30 it happened last year, and he got 7 assists after and created a lot of big chances after that. And so it's that, can he hit the ground running again in those opening weeks? And I don't really want to play an early wild card this year. I mentioned it earlier. I'd like to get to kind of game week 8, game week 9 before I have to do that. And if you don't start with Trent, then yeah, you can bring him in probably 2 or 3 transfers. But I just feel at this moment in time, I feel a bit more comfortable including him, because yes, the first 3 fixtures, well, either side of game week 2 aren't great. But after that, there's a good run. From game week 4, he's got Villa, Wolves, West Ham. Games where I want Trent. So 8 million is a lot of money, but if he plays that hybrid role throughout the season, he can get 15 to 20 assists. I'm sure of it, playing in that position. So I kind of want a piece of that for 8 million. So at the moment I'm kind of thinking, I am going to start with him.
Yeah. Certainly makes a lot of sense, and he's in my team as well. So certainly preaching to the choir in terms of what I think, but hopefully preaching to some people out there without Trent, you might save him a few points. Let's talk about Reece James, because he's maybe he's not in everybody's team. He's not in my team at the moment, but there's encouraging signs in terms of what is going to be available for Chelsea this year. New manager, some new signings as well.
Yeah, Pochettino coming in. We're expecting him to move to a back 4, probably a 4-2-3-1, which is what he favoured at Spurs. I think he played a 4-3-3 mostly at PSG, but different personnel available. I think you look at the Chelsea squad, and they can certainly play that back 4. They may be a little bit light in midfield, but I think Enzo Fernandez and probably Gallagher will slot in there in that kind of pivot, unless they bring in somebody like Caicedo potentially. But I think the good thing is with with James is that when Pochettino was at Spurs, he had a lot of joy with his fullbacks. You know, you look back and you think Kyle Walker, you think Trippier, even Ben Davies. I think he got 7 assists in one season playing under Pochettino, and he only got something like 20-something starts. I think it was in 2017-18. So he's got a history of these fullbacks, even if they're in a back four, getting high up the pitch, supplying the width with the attackers getting a bit narrow. So I like it, and I like the fact that they haven't got Europe this year, Chelsea, and we've seen before how much of an impact having a whole 3 week for Pochettino to prepare this team for the weekend match, how important that can be rather than having to travel around or Europa League on a Thursday night, get back on a Friday, play on a Sunday. Just having that whole week to be at Cobham and working on the tactics and working on the shape of the team, I think that will really benefit them. And those fixtures from game week 3 are really tasty for Reece James. So I'm thinking of starting with him. I get people don't like him because availability. He only started 14 games last year. I think the season before and the one before that, it was over 20. It was 20-ish games he started, I think, in the 2 pre-season ones before that. But you know, if James gets injured in game week 4 or 5, we've got transfers, and you know, we can remove him. It's not ideal, but that can happen to anybody, injuries. And yeah, I'm sure he won't stay on my team throughout the season because he will be injured at some point. But for now, I think I prefer him to Chilwell because there's a bit less competition on that right side. I think Chilwell's got Cucurella, he's got Lewis Hall, who played really well towards the end of last season. I think Chilwell's going to be first choice, but there's maybe a little bit more competition than on the right, where there's just the new chap, Gusto, who was on loan at Lyon last year, but he's young, he's raw, he's 4.0 million. So if James were to get an injury, that might, you know, make him an interesting pick. But yeah, I think I favour James just a little bit over Chilwell at the moment.
Yeah, you're right to mention that fixture swing as well. I think anyone going early on Chelsea, I think, will definitely get the benefit of perhaps maybe getting a bit of extra money in the bank because everybody flocks towards the player that they already had. And then, you know, you're free to, whenever, let's say you've got Reece James for game week 3 and everybody else needs to get him because he did so well in game week 1 and 2, you can then go and find yourself new players in other areas of the team and just stay kind of ahead of the crowd, because I think that Spurs and Chelsea especially have the possibility of offering that potential to anyone who is, you know, brave enough or bold enough or even just smart enough to go with Chelsea from the off. So it could be a good tactic for sure. Let's have a look at Ake then. So I've seen him increasingly seeing him as the chosen Man City defender in some teams. I went with Stones originally. A few other people did, but I've switched to Shaw now, for example. But Ake seems to be earning a bit of attention. Would you say he is? Well, I guess the question is, you clearly want to be invested in City defence. Is Ake a placeholder until we know who the most likely starter is, or is there something about him that you particularly like?
Well, I like the price for one because it's 5-0 for a Man City defender. We know how good the fixtures are at the start of the season. We're talking about the treble winners, best team in the country by quite a distance. So getting into that defence, I think, could be important. But 5 million for Ake and that new system they're playing when he's on the left of the back 3. I think Akanji maybe covered for him a bit last year when he got injured, but I do think that Ake, what he brings to that role is really important. He's got that speed and that physicality, but also that kind of a ball playing ability that Guardiola loves. So I think that he'll be a good pick there, and I think at the moment he'll be first choice. Now, if they bring in an additional centre back, which has been talked about, we may need to look at that again. But personnel stays the same that it is now, then I think Aki's a really nice way into that defence, who will play most weeks. And if he doesn't play, hopefully he's not the kind of player who will come on as a sub. And then you can get your player off the bench as a replacement. But at the moment, yeah, I looked at Ake and I looked at Kanji, and I just think maybe Ake is a little bit more secure in that position. Whereas Akanji, you've got Kyle Walker, you've got Rico Lewis, who's maybe a bit more comfortable on the right than the left. So that was my thinking with him.
Yeah, nice. It'd be interesting to see, obviously, with pre-season as well, if that helps us pin down as well. So let's look at Botman and Baldock, who are currently your budget bench assets. Now, what I'm liking about seeing Botman in a lot of people's teams is that it's probably unlikely you're going to start him from the off, but I suppose you've got that option to hold on to him until Newcastle's fixtures turn.
Yes, exactly. And I was a bit wary. Everybody's flocking to him because you're getting a 4.5 million defender for a Champions League quality defender. Newcastle did very well defensively last year. The only thing I was thinking is when those fixtures turn in game week 6 and they go to Sheffield United, Newcastle, am I going to want Trippier for that run, which is really good for Newcastle? We've got 4 or 5 really good games after that, I think. And if I've got Botman, do I want to double up on them? And that was my only hesitation with that, with going with him. He's in for now. It's hard to argue against the value he's going to offer at 4.5. But that was my only thinking with Trippier and looking a little bit further down the line. Do I want him? But yeah, he's in for now. And yeah, the fixtures do good. Maybe I could double up on them because the fixtures are very good. It depends how we think Newcastle are going to do. I mean, David, do you think we'll see the same kind of clean sheet output as last year? Do you think there'll be a bit of regression as they balance Champions League, or what do you think?
Oh, I whenever I am asked these kind of questions, I always go with the geeky cop out and say there's 2 parallel universes here. One where they really take to the Champions League and they build on last season and are able to keep the defensive returns doing well. And there's also a parallel universe where the added hectic nature of a European turnaround week is something they're not used to, and it makes it very hard for them to prepare for games. I suppose if I was being asked for an answer and there was some level of threat involved, like maybe if you had a gun pointed to my head, then maybe I'd say the signings that they're making, or at least the signings that they look like they're going to make, past obviously getting Tonali as well, I think that we will see them offer some value this season. Like, he's a great signing that will help really bolster their midfield. So that, I think, is the scenario that is the most likely. But I think really what me and you both need to see in terms of what we're going to want from Newcastle defensively is to see how they cope with the first 6 game weeks of the season. Of course, Champions League is going to come in. I think it's between game weeks 4 and 5, I think, or between 5 and 6, something like that, around that time.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I think it's 5 and 6, but
when
yeah,
we're
that's
in that
exactly
spell,
right. How are they going to cope with that?
Yeah, the fact that their fixtures aren't very nice actually is a blessing, I think, for fantasy managers, because it means that anyone who's going to take a risk on that, they're not going to be a particularly large group of people. So in effect, if Newcastle do surprise everybody and start well, despite the bad fixtures, it's not going to damage you to be not having a piece of that pie. And by the time that the fixtures turn, you will have a much clearer picture, and you'll be able to answer the question, do I want to double up on the defence? How has the European stuff impacted? So I think we're quite fortunate there in the way the fixtures have fallen for Newcastle, I suppose.
Yeah, no, I think I'd agree with that. And so yeah, Botman's in for now. Happy with it. I mean, even if they're not, they really, for Botman to offer value, they don't need to be doing that much, because he's 4.5. Even if there's a bit of regression, he can still do well. It's just Trippier in my thinking. If they are looking good in those first 4 or 5 weeks, and is it easy enough to move to him? Because obviously he's had a price hike. He's up to 6.5 now. So yeah, that's something to think about. But yeah, Botman's the 4.5 of choice at the moment.
Yeah. Well, let's move finally down to the 4 million then. We've already talked about 4 million Sheffield United defenders. Now, it's unlikely that George Baldock is going to be anything like John Lundstrom, but it does feel quite nice. It feels almost like putting on an old coat that you'd lost a couple of years ago. Like, oh, that fits quite nicely. A 4 million starting Sheffield United defender is quite exciting.
Yeah, I've seen quite a few people say, is he going to be a starter? And I'm not a Sheffield United fan. There's Bogle there as well, who can play that right wing back role. But from speaking to the contributors that I did for the promoted series, who were very, very, very good. They watched their team week in, week out. They were pretty bullish on Baldock starting. They both said he's not a great crosser of the ball when he gets into advanced positions, but he's a pretty solid player. And I think even FPL Blades, who helped us out with it, was one of the 2 contributors. He said that, even at 4.5, he would consider him. So when he's come in at 4.0, that kind of immediately piqued my interest. I don't think Sheffield United are going to spend much this summer. I saw an interview with Billy Sharp earlier. He's not going to be playing there next year, but he said that the manager doesn't think he's going to get many players in. So it probably will be Baldock and then Bogle as backup, I think. And that might develop in pre-season. Maybe we'll get more info about that. But for now, 4 million starting Sheffield United wing back, that holds more appeal than maybe somebody at Burnley or Luton or something like that. I think Baldock would be the player I would kind of slightly edged towards.
Yeah, and I suppose that you mentioned obviously Burnley and Luton. Bayer at Burnley is a sort of ball playing centre
Yeah.
back. He's affectionately known as Becken Bayer at Turf Moor. That's the sort of player he is. He's going to possibly get bonus points for passes and things like that on the odd occasion where they keep clean sheets potentially. But in terms of positionally, it's not very exciting in comparison. And then Bell at Luton is a left-sided centre back who might not even necessarily start, because it sounds like Anderson might play that role. Anderson also
Yeah.
is a 4 million, but in effect, it's a bit sounding more and more like a 50-50 from the conversations I'm having with people and what I'm reading as well. So less
Yeah.
exciting there. And then, and the thing about, well, this is to stick the fixtures back on the screen. Sheffield United's fixtures, they're not like amazing, but they sort of pop up with a decent fixture every now and then. So game week 1 against
Yeah.
Crystal Palace, game week 2 away to Forest, game week 4 at home to Everton. They are sort of slotted in like jigsaw prongs with other pieces, with Man City at home, Spurs away, Newcastle at home. So really horrible fixtures and some possible ones you can maybe chance at getting a clean sheet. So a 4 million
Yeah.
defender in there, it's a bit like win-win. If you put the 4 million guy in to start in some of those games and they keep a clean sheet, great. If they don't, it's like, oh well, he only costs 4 million, and then you can easily bench him for the horrible fixtures.
Yeah, let's be honest. How often are we going to use these 4 million players when you've
That's
got
true.
a defence like that I've got on the screen, and like a lot of other people have, when you've got Botman who can't even get into the team at the moment. So it's very, very rare. What we kind of want with this 4 million is to game week 1 to nick a dodgy goal or get an assist and make it 0.2 on him or something like that, and then they'll have served their purpose in our team. But yeah, I don't think I was starting very much. But if he's playing and he's 4 million and he's a wing back, that's absolutely fine.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about getting the money on the pitch, I suppose, and you've done that very well in midfield.
Mm.
We've already talked about your Arsenal guys, and we've sort of already talked about Rashford and his comparison with Fernandes. Let's talk about him in a little bit more detail. Can you see yourself switching to Fernandes at some point? And then, obviously, outside of that, you got Mbeumo and Matoma. But let's start with Rashford. How much of a difficult decision was that to go with him versus
I,
Fernandes? I suppose is the question.
I like Fernandez, and immediately when his price came out, got quite excited by it, and I will double up at some point. But the thing is with Rashford is he's just head and shoulders above Fernandez for goal threat, and the way that FPL prices his points for goals over assists immediately makes him more appealing. And Rashford's home form as well at Old Trafford last year was absolutely excellent. And they've got Wolves and Forest at home inside the first three. They've actually got, I think, was it 5 home games in the first 8 fixtures. So all of those things led me towards Rashford. And as well, Fernandes, we don't quite know how Mount's going to impact him either. And I think they'll probably both line up as number 8s with Casemiro behind, but we don't know at the moment. Fernandes did drop a little bit deeper at times last year to help with the build-up in that kind of Eriksen role. That could, of course, be Mount that does that. Fernandes could remain as a 10 or out a bit wider. But there was that little bit of uncertainty, as well as the Rashford goal threat, the home form. Everything kind of led me towards him. And as well, if United don't have a centre forward, Rashford could start the season as the striker potentially if Martial isn't ready to play, which he might not be if he picks up a knock in pre-season, which has happened before. So I don't think I'm close to taking out Rashford for Fernandes at the moment, but there will be double up during the season. I'm 99% sure of that.
Yeah, the prices just make it inevitable, don't they? With them being able to be
Mm,
both in your team for that sort of price, yeah, I feel exactly the same. When
yeah,
the fixtures are really good, we're gonna
yeah,
have them both. The other price points
definitely.
you've got either side of him, you've got two 6.5 million midfielders. There's a lot of choice in this bracket as well, including even a
Yeah.
6.5 million attacker at Chelsea, for example. So it's a good price point to be involved in. Good to have two of them, I suppose, when there's lots of choice. And Burmo, I suppose, kind of picks himself if you want a Brentford 6.5.
Mm.
Matoma, there's more choice. What was your thinking with these price points and these players?
I mean, it's a price point which I absolutely love doing the differentials for each week's for Scout. This is where you tend to be looking. It's that kind of 6 to 7.5 million midfield bracket, and there's loads of value this year. I mean, I love Gibbs White. Brennan Johnson, when he was classified as a midfielder, was interesting. You've got Bowen, who's had a drop. You've got Maddison, who's gone to Spurs. Sterling as well at Chelsea, who's dropped down to 7. So there's so many options. I mean, my thinking was Mitoma, because Brighton have got that really nice first three fixtures, Luton in game week 1. We don't know how yet they're going to cope with Europe. They've lost a few players. McAllister's gone. I don't think they'll get Colwill back. We might see Casado go. But do I want to kind of bet against Brighton when I don't? They were incredible in attack under De Zerbi last year, and I don't feel confident enough to say I'm not going to go for one of their midfielders. I think it's safer to start with one, given that game week 1 fixture. So it was Matoma for me. I prefer him to. I went with Marsh quite a bit last year, but maybe there'll be a little bit more rotation in his spot next year. So that's why Matoma went in. Numbuemo on penalties, we think, did very well without Tony last year. Brentford are very good at home. They've got a lot of home fixtures early on in the season. And it's if it does either of those two positions don't pay off, then there's a lot of options around that price, like we just touched on. So it's no big deal if you have to kind of shift sideways to somebody else.
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly looking at Brighton to Chelsea being something I maybe do, because Brighton start off really well and then have some harder fixtures. So it's Luton at home, Wolves away, West Ham at home. That's really nice. Then Newcastle at home, Man United away.
It's tough.
This gets tougher. Around the sort of time that Chelsea's get a little bit nicer. So there's, as you say, lots of stopping off and jumping on points, a couple of station stops on the train tracks that is the season ticker. So it's worth keeping an eye out for those. Well, we've talked about Chelsea there. You perhaps maybe might not be using those 6.5 millions to jump onto a Chelsea midfielder, because you do have Nkunku up front, 7.5 million striker. Now, if I'm not mistaken, you were involved in scouting him for Scout with the articles and the video. Has that opportunity to look at him under the microscope helped you realise just how much of an exciting asset he is for the Premier League?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, he's a player that I was obviously aware of last season. I can remember him scoring a hat-trick against Man City for Leipzig, and I'd seen bits of him. I didn't really realize quite how good he was until I started looking into those pieces and seeing what people in the Bundesliga who had watched him week in, week out had said, and looking at the numbers and the goal output over the past couple of seasons. He was joint top scorer last year and he was injured for a lot of it, playing in an attacking Leipzig side. And looked really exciting. Now, I think that I was hoping he would be a midfielder. But it's obviously not a deal breaker being a forward, because he's made it into my team. So he's in 7.5 million. If he's a regular starter, which I don't see how he cannot be in that Chelsea team with the personnel they've currently got, I think he will be. I think there's a really good chance he's on penalties. And I've seen some talk about Reece James possibly being on them, but I would think it would be Nkunku. So those fixtures in game week 3 onwards, which are really great. And Chelsea's fixtures turn for the worse in game week 9, which is probably a point when I'll be looking to wildcard around that kind of international break. So, it made a lot of sense to me. Watkins, I like, obviously being a Villa fan, at 8 million, but the fixtures put me off a little bit, and I have a few reservations that he might not be on penalties next year because Tielemans has come in and Watkins isn't great at them, and little things like that push me towards Nkunku. The only real other forward that I considered in that spot, and this isn't based, I can't really come and say, oh, look at this because this player's going to do great. It's Solanke, and I've just got a hunch that he's going to do very well under the new manager there. The fixtures aren't great, though, for him, so that might be one later on in the season. So I'm on Nkunku for now, and I do think he'll do well at Chelsea, yeah.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, I have the advantage of having read your article on him to then do the video on him. So I in effect, kind of assimilated all of your knowledge. I'm sure I can think of some sci-fi reference whereby I sort of like picked your brains, a little bit like Starship Troopers, I suppose. And so I very much have that exact same knowledge, and I feel exactly the same way as you. I'm initially just disappointed that he's not a midfield player, but at the same time, still think he can offer good value, because I think he's just going to be so heavily involved. And some comparison in your article, of course, to Dele Alli, because he's the sort of player that can play a free role in an attack, be a second striker, perhaps play as a number 10, maybe play out wide, maybe occasionally play number 9 when they need it. He's versatile in sort of transitional stages in the game as well. So Pochettino famously has got the best out of a player like that. So I'm very, very excited for him. I've got Sterling for now, because I think, like you, that Chelsea are going to be worth investing in. But I do hope at some point I can make room for Nkunku in my team because he does look very exciting. But you've mentioned there Ollie
Yeah.
Watkins as being someone you wanted to have in your team. You do still have an Aston Villa striker though, so don't worry. You get to keep your Aston Villa fan pass for another season. It's Cameron Archer. At this point in all of the team drafts, I'm coming to everybody's third forward, and it's really funny because like everyone's logic behind having that guy is always ridiculous. So like General has got Plange simply because of take the Plange.
Liked his name.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Oh, that was, yeah, I'm sure he put in his he said he liked his name. He had a good season last year, General, so maybe he's kind of sticking to that approach that he had last pre-season.
But with you, it's a little bit more influenced, I suppose, by your fan allegiance. But that's why I'm so glad to have an Aston Villa fan with me in the virtual studio, because I've heard good things about him in the past. There's a guy I used to work with at my previous job who's also a Villa fan who is able to go and see a lot of games as well, and is very excited for what the future could hold for him. Maybe not going to be an FPL asset maybe this year, but good future at Villa for this guy?
Well, he was out on loan last year at Borough, and I've got a really close friend who's a Borough fan, and he likes him, but he has his doubts that if he's going to be a Premier able to come in and basically lead the line at a club like Villa. But I like what I've seen of him. He's had a good Euros. He came off the bench a bit for England, and this Villa at the moment, we've signed Tielemans. We're on the verge of signing Torres as well at the back, but there hasn't been any investment up front. And at the moment, really, you've got Ollie Watkins there, who's going to be a nailed-on starter week in, week out. Now, we also signed Duran in January, but this wasn't an MRA signing. This was the board signing, and he came on as a bit of an impact sub. But I think Archer is probably ahead of him when he comes back in. And so if we don't sign another striker by game week 1, Archer could get some minutes off the bench. We've obviously got the Conference League now as well, which is probably where he'll get a lot of his minutes. But the 4.5 million forward category, like the midfield category as well, there isn't much in there. So if you've got a player in there who's at least going to be getting some minutes off the bench each week, that's probably as much as you can hope for at this point, unless somebody like Balogun gets a move from Arsenal to another Premier League side, which I think is probably wishful thinking. But that 20 minutes off the bench every now and again might be the best that we get from that 4.5 forward.
I mean, and that's the thing, is just managing everyone's expectations, I suppose, is that this is a position that is, if you're playing 3-5-2, that is throwaway at best. Because if you go for a 5.5 or a 6 million, you're not in a 3-5-2, you're never going to start them. So that's kind of wasting money.
It's a waste.
And you're probably just going to, in a world where you've got Botman and Baldock, who we think are capable of chipping in with bits and bobs every now and then, regular starters in teams that can keep clean sheets. Well, as you've lined them up now, you've got Archer as the third sub. So many other people I've looked at their teams, and yeah, their 4.5 million striker is rooted to the foot of the bench. So it's redundant in many ways to talk about them, but also equally entertaining at the same time, because everybody has some very interesting reasons behind having them there. Because you can't think of an FPL reason, that's for sure. It's got to be nothing to do with FPL, because he might as well just not bother. So yeah. That's your squad. Thanks very much, Tom, for talking us through that. And of course, you've already mentioned you've tinkered with it a little bit. We might hear from you later on in the pre-season to find out whether or not those things have impacted. We will be looking at the pre-season match as well, so you might catch a little bit more of Tom on the channel as he brings us what he's spotted in pre-season. But thanks very much for coming on, Tom. Anything else you want to add before we let these fine folks tinker with their teams?
I don't think so. I mean, it's early doors, isn't it, at the moment? We've only had the prices for under a week now. So, it's more about structure, I suppose, this and price points and things like that. But as everything develops in the coming weeks and we get more info from the friendlies and managers start to chat and do their interviews a bit more, we'll get to kind of nail down those picks. But yeah, it's a really exciting time. Writing loads for the website at the moment. So have a look at that. And hopefully, I'd love to come back on, David, maybe in a few weeks' time as we kind of get closer to that August kickoff and see what's changed since then and why it's changed. And hopefully we can all chat enough where we all get the right picks and get off to a good start.
Yeah, absolutely. That is absolutely the aim. Well, in the interest of letting you guys get off to that best possible start, we will leave you to your tinkering now, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, David.